John Green ist schon vorgestellt worden und ich entnehme dem Applaus, dass man ihn auch nicht großartig nochmal vorstellen muss, einer der erfolgreichsten Jugendbuchautoren unserer Tage. Das neue Buch, um das es heute Abend geht, ist eigentlich mehr als ein Jugendbuch, vielleicht waren es seine früheren auch schon. Bei diesem hier bin ich mir ganz sicher, das Schicksal ist ein mieser Verräter, ist ein Buch eigentlich für alle Altersklassen, weil es ein Buch ist, in dem es um die großen Fragen des Lebens geht, um die Fragen von Leben und Tod, aber auf eine Weise, die ganz ungewöhnlich, ganz charmant und ganz toll ist und die sicherlich deswegen das Buch über das, was man normalerweise als Jugendliteratur vielleicht bezeichnen könnte, wo die Erwachsenen sagen, naja, ist nichts für uns, weit hinaushebt. I think it's very hard, though, to find, as a writer, a certain tone that makes you walk the fine line between, let's say, disaster on the one hand, right, and pure kitsch on the other hand. Yeah. So on the one hand, there would be the poor suffering victim that's just, in a black hole of nothingness. And on the other hand, there would be the strong hero who has a strong will and who survives just because he wants to. Did you make any experience or did you meet any people that would give you an idea of which would be the ideal tone or the good tone to write about this difficult subject?
Yeah, I did. And I for many years, I started working on this book in 2000, so almost 11 or 12 years before it was published, and a few hundred words from those early manuscripts survived to the finished book, but the vast majority of it didn't, because I veered to both sides at various times. At times I was overly sentimental, at times I was sort of overly sarcastic or dismissive, sort of a tone with no guts in it, no emotion in it. And I think that was me trying to distance myself from the people I'd known and cared about who died of cancer. But eventually, it was only through making friends with a young woman named Esther, who was a fan of the videos I make with my brother and a fan of my books. Through knowing her, she had cancer. She died in 2010 after I'd known her for about 2 years. But through our friendship, I saw a different way into the story because I saw the way that Esther was living her life. I saw how funny she was while still being honest and straightforward and reverent, I guess, toward her friends and family. And I wanted to take some of that tone and bring it to the book. Now, Hazel in The Fault in Our Stars is very different from Esther, and I think since Esther is not here to defend herself, she would never watch like America's Next Top Model or anything like that. She liked good television like Doctor Who. But I knew that was going to be an applause line. But she was, her compassion, her empathy, the ability that she had to, even during her own suffering, to be conscious of the way that her illness was affecting her parents and her family, all of that was brought to Hazel, and I think that's what made the book possible for me.
Augustus, he's a guy who, at the end of this very chapter, pulls out a cigarette. In a cancer group, he pulls out a cigarette and he puts it in his mouth. And Hazel says, thinks, this is the most gorgeous guy I've ever seen, and he's so stupid, he's sick and has cancer, and he starts smoking. What he does not do is lighten that cigarette. So I should say he's the bravest non-smoking smoker in American literature, so to speak. What kind of a guy is he? Why does he have these attitudes, and what makes him so cool and fascinating for Hazel?
Well, he's very performative, I guess. He's very conscious of his style, and he knows that he's cool. He knows that, he knows exactly what's going to happen when he puts that cigarette in his mouth. He knows that Hazel's going to be horrified, and then he knows that he's going to get to tell her that it's a metaphor, and he knows that girls like metaphors. So
it's as easy as that.
he knows exactly what he's after, and he knows how to get it. And you know, later there's a scene where they're at the this art park in Indianapolis, and he basically just delivers a monologue, like he's memorized a monologue to deliver to her. And that's the kind of person that he is, and it's very attractive. But the person she eventually falls in love with is not this imperial Augustus, but Gus, who is, you know, fragile and vulnerable like anyone else.
It seems that they don't want the rest of the world to pity them. But what is so bad about pity?
It's a fine line between pity and compassion.
Okay.
And I think Jesus wanted us to be compassionate toward the sick, and to treat the sick as we would treat the well, but not in the sense of being compassionate and, you know, going to the lepers and not fearing them, not fearing disease. But that's not quite the same thing as pity, which is, to me at least, like looking down on someone and seeing them as less than you, and oh, isn't it so unfortunate that you've had this thing happen to you, because then you can never be equals, and you can never really engage in meaningful dialogue, because it will always be me talking down to you and you talking up to me. But I guess the broader answer to the question for me is that I wanted them to be angry and funny in their anger, but I wanted them to have to strip away this anger and reconcile themselves to reality, and to finally be okay with it. They use the word okay back and forth all the time with each other, and I think that's what I wanted them to come to this place of being okay with the world as it is, instead of, what is the great German word, Weltschmerz?
Weltschmerz.
Oh. Yes. Between that and Sitzpinkler, it's a beautiful language.
One thing that might seem a little bit artificial is that there are 16, 17, 15-year-old kids dealing with ideas of Shakespeare, great lyrics. They go to Amsterdam, they move into a hotel which is called the Philosopher, and one of them lives in the Kierkegaard room, the other one lives in the Heidegger room.
That's a real hotel.
I'm sure. Well, so here's the facts.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, I'm suddenly defending myself with facts.
Well, on the other hand, it seems that young people maybe do not read Kierkegaard or Heidegger, which they don't either here in this book, but that they deal with these big questions. And do they do that in a different way than adults and professional philosophers do it? What's the difference then?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question for me. Both like how they read differently or grapple with those questions differently, and whether it's realistic to have them grapple with those questions, or whether it's me with my 35-year-old man problems imposing them upon teenagers. And I think that there is probably an element of that, to be honest with you, but I do think that teenagers are really interested in those big philosophical questions, and because they're grappling with them for the first time, because they're being asked to answer those questions for the first time, at least outside of their parents' direct influence, they're really passionate about it, and they approach these questions without irony. So when you ask me about Kierkegaard or Heidegger, or you ask me about free will or the role that suffering plays in human life or something, I'm always going to approach that with a little bit of irony, because it's almost embarrassing as an adult to be unironically philosophical. Because
we think that these questions are finally unanswerable, or why? Where does that irony come from?
Maybe we've given up on them,
okay.
Or at least we've given up on approaching them directly,
okay.
And so we're approaching them from all these different angles. I don't know, though. That's a good question. And so, but I like writing about teenagers and for teenagers, because you can approach those things head on, in a way, and hopefully that feels authentic to their experience in a way that if these characters were 35, you would be like, well, you need to pay the mortgage. Stop worrying about suffering.
Hazel has a dream. She admires an author by the Dutch name of Peter van Houten. There's a whole big community out there on the internet, and some of them are here. That follow you, not only reading your books, but also follow your video blogs that you do on a regular basis. And that, of course, I think write you tons of mails, letters, or post Facebook notes to you. Only 3 days ago, I could find a line by a girl named Erin. In Hazel's words, my third best friend is an author that doesn't know I exist. That author is John Green. John, I don't know if you'll ever stumble across this post, but I think you do. But I just want to personally thank you for everything. Thank you for writing the books I've lost myself in time after time, the books that I never stop reading. Thank you for all of your YouTube videos. Thank you for all you've done to decrease world suck, because surely you've decreased the suck in my life. Thank you for helping all the others that you've helped. Thank you for existing. John, thank you for joining us tonight here in this wonderful church. Thank you very much.